Hi everyone. Today's reading is from Galatians chapter 1, from verse 1 to verse 10. So won't you follow with me in Galatians? Paul, an apostle, sent not from men nor by a man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brothers and sisters with me, to the churches in Galatia, grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, who gave himself for our sins to rescue us from the present evil age, according to the will of our God and Father, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ, and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. As we have already said, so now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? For if I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Just so far in God's word.
Thanks, Candace. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Emmanuel Church from my side. It's very good to have you with us. I hope that you've had a good weekend. Isn't it a stunning day? Beautiful day outside, and stunning day because we get to start a new series this morning in the book of Galatians, and we're going to spend this term looking at this wonderful letter that Paul wrote to the Galatian Christians, so do keep that open and in front of you. But let me pray before we begin. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you once again for the fact that we are able to open your word, to hear from your word, to hear you address us through your word. Lord, as we give our attention now just for a few minutes to the passage that's in front of us, we pray for your help. We pray that your Spirit would be among us, that you would move among us in a powerful way so that we might come to a better understanding of who you are, what it means to know Jesus, and what it means to live for him and trust in him. And we pray this in his name. Amen. It's getting harder and harder in the world today to spot what is real from what is fake. Have you noticed this? Does this worry you the way it worries me? We all know about fake news and fake stories that do the rounds. And the problem is it's getting harder and harder to tell which is which. I was thinking about asking you to put your hand up. If you've ever shared something on social media or sent it on via WhatsApp, a story or something like that, and then only to realize later that it actually was nonsense. I won't ask you to put your hand up, but chances are we're all like Luan. Chances are we've all done it, right? And it's getting harder and harder. And it's getting more scary, of course, with artificial intelligence, because now, it's possible to generate pictures and documents and even videos that seem to be like the real thing. I mean, I'd hate to be a teacher or a university lecturer in an age like we're living in, where you can just tell the artificial intelligence to produce the assignment or the homework that you have to do. There was what's called a deep fake video. Have you heard of these things? Basically a video with somebody saying something, doing something that isn't actually the real person. So there was a video doing the rounds of Cyril Ramaphosa having a family meeting. Anyone hear about this? And telling everybody about the energy crisis and things that are going to happen as a response to the energy crisis. And one of those things that's going to happen is the Voortrekker Monument and Loftus Versfeld Rugby Stadium are going to be torn down, and diesel generators are going to be built in their place. You can imagine how Pretoria reacted to this news. But it wasn't him at all. It looked like him, sounded like him. He was doing what he would normally do in a family meeting, but it wasn't him at all. We're going to have to become better and better at recognizing what is true from what is fake. Now, the same is true when it comes to the gospel. As I said, we're spending this term in the book of Galatians, and at the heart of this letter written to these Christians in the province of Galatia in the ancient world is this question: what is the true gospel? And how do we know what is the true gospel when there are so many alternative fake gospels out there? What is it that makes the gospel unique? Now, what brought this letter about is that these Christians were confused about this question. Have a look with me at verse 7 of this opening section. It says, evidently, Paul says, some people are throwing you into confusion and trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. Now, we'll try and work out as we go some of the details of what was going on. But notice, just straight up front, it is possible to become confused about the gospel. That's a scary thing. And what's even more scary is this confusion was happening to churches much like our own. This was not written to a church that was sort of a fringe church, believing way out things, a church that had turned its back on the biblical truth. This was a church that knew all about Jesus and believed in him and knew about salvation and understood about sin and salvation and judgment to come. And yet, here they are, confused. It is really important that we realize what the true gospel is, that we're clear on it, that we get right to the heart of what makes the gospel unique. So why don't we have a look at what Paul says about the uniqueness of the gospel in this opening section. It's unique in three ways. Firstly, the gospel comes, we're told here, with unique authority. It comes with unique authority. Now, this letter is one of the earliest New Testament writings that we have, maybe the earliest. And as I said, it's written to ancient Christians, and it's written to ancient Christians in the area that we would now know as Turkey, or Turkey, I think it's now officially called. Written to Christians who'd been established in the gospel just a few years earlier by the Apostle Paul himself. You may remember Paul was the maverick, the pioneer gospel evangelist. He went out from Jerusalem to the ancient world, Turkey, Greece, eventually even to Rome, with this message about Jesus Christ. And he told these ancient people in the the area of Europe and Asia, he told them very simply, Jesus Christ is Lord. And hundreds, thousands of people turned and put their trust in this Jewish Messiah who'd come to save the world. So that was Paul's approach. That was his message. Jesus Christ is Lord. Now the problem was, not everyone was happy with what Paul was doing and what he was saying. Back where it all started in Jerusalem, there was a particular group of Christian Jewish leaders. In other words, they were Jewish by background and culture, but they'd become Christians. They weren't happy with what Paul was saying. Because what they thought is that Paul is making it too easy for everybody. He's telling everyone all you have to do is trust in Jesus. And so what they did is they followed Paul around, and as soon as he left town, they went in and tried to fix all the problems with his teaching. And one of the ways they did that is to try and discredit him. Because if you can discredit the man, you can discredit the message. And what they were saying to everybody is, in addition to trusting in Jesus, which is important, of course, you also have to do what God has told his people to do down through the centuries. That is, to observe the laws about foods and the Sabbath, and even get circumcised. Right? In other words, you have to become more like the Jewish people of old. This is what had thrown the Galatian Christians into confusion, as verse 7 tells us. And it is confusing, isn't it? You're a new Christian, you've heard one thing from Paul, and now you've heard another thing from these Jewish leaders. Who are you going to believe? Do you believe Paul, the sort of one-man band, the guy who comes in and proclaims about Jesus Christ? Or do you believe these Jewish leaders with all their history and pedigree and experience? And so that's why, right from the opening verse, Paul lays down his authority. Look with me at verse 1. Paul, an apostle, sent not from men or by a man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brothers and sisters with me to the churches in Galatia. Now, letters in the ancient world followed a very similar format. Basically, who it's from, who it's to, and greetings. Actually, very similar to the way we send emails, right? Who it's from, who it's to, greetings. Should take one sentence. Paul takes 5 verses. And the reason is he wants to elaborate on some really important things that he wants to say. So instead of saying Paul, he says, Paul, an apostle, sent not from men nor by man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father. And the key word there is apostle. Apostle means somebody who's been sent with authority. See, who is Paul coming, with whose authority is he coming and saying the things that he's saying? Has he gone rogue? Is he making up his own message and doing his own thing? No, he's been sent not from men, nor by men, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father. He is an apostle. Remember, God had handpicked apostles to send out with the message about who he is and to speak on his behalf. Paul says, I am an apostle. There's been a lot of talk in the news about South Africa's relationship with Russia. Have you seen any of this stuff in the news? And there's a question mark over whether we should be friends with Russia in any way. And so there's a lot of fallout or potential fallout to our relationship with Russia. So I heard this week that there is a delegation that is being sent to Washington, D.C. to try and smooth things over with America, right? We want to be good friends with America, that's for sure. And so Naledi Pandor, who's the International Relations Minister, she's leading this envoy to Washington. So there's a sense in which she is an apostle. She's an apostle of South Africa. She speaks on behalf of and she represents South Africa when she goes. What Paul is saying is, I'm an apostle, and I speak on behalf of and I represent God. I represent his authority. My message is not my own, is what he's telling us. And he actually says later on in verse 11, he says, this is how I got the message. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. I didn't receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. We're going to hear more about Paul's story in the weeks to come. But this has massive implications. If Paul is an apostle of God, and he comes with the authority of God, and he speaks on behalf of God, this tells us that we had better listen to his message. We better listen to what Paul says. His authority is unique. You know, there are no apostles today. I don't know if you realize this. There are people who claim to be apostles. You sometimes see billboards advertising a particular ministry of so-and-so apostle. There are no apostles today. There are no people today who are sent out with the same authority that God sent the apostles out in the first century. And the reason is very simple. God has said everything that he wants to say to us. He has said it through his apostles. It's really important that we're clear on this. We need to know how it is that God speaks to us today. There's a sense in which God never speaks directly to us today. The way in which God's word comes to us is through his apostles. God speaks to them, and we hear God speak through them to us. See, if we want to know what the message of the gospel is, we have to go back to those that God entrusted with this message, his apostles. And so the gospel we believe today has to be that one. If we want to make sure we don't get confused, we've got to be devoted to them and their words and their message. As soon as we move away from the Bible, we're in big trouble. It's the only place where God speaks with authority. So it's really important that we don't believe anything that anyone says just because they come with a big name or a big reputation. We have to ask, what does God say in his word? That's what I'm sticking to. So the gospel has unique authority. Secondly, notice what Paul says here, that the gospel comes with unique power. This is why he's defending it with such strong language, such energy, because it comes with unique power. This is the only gospel that can actually change lives and change our world. And notice how it does that. Let me just read again from verse 1. Paul, an apostle, sent not from men, nor by a man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brothers and sisters with me to the churches in Galatia, grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, who gave himself for our sins to rescue us from the present evil age, according to the will of our God and Father, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. There is so much packed into these 5 verses. I was tempted to say, why don't you just jot down all the kind of Christian truths that you can see packed into these 5 verses? I reckon you could probably fill a theological textbook just with these 5 verses. It'll keep you busy this week in your growth groups. But what I want you to notice is that the gospel Paul is defending here is a gospel that brings radical change in people's lives. What does it bring to us? What change does it bring? Notice what he says in verse 3. This is a gospel that brings grace and peace to us. Grace and peace, that's the key phrase. Now, to be fair, that's a fairly common greeting in the ancient world. If you're writing a letter as a Christian, you might say grace and peace to you. Paul, though, has chosen these 2 words because of how significant they are. These 2 words tell us why the gospel is so powerful and why we cannot mess with it. because it is a gospel that brings grace and peace from God to us, and nothing else in all the world can do that. Let's think about those two words for a minute. Grace. Grace is a word that means undeserved kindness, unearned favor. And what the gospel message that Paul brings tells us is that to be right with God has nothing to do with who I am or what I do. The gospel has everything to do with what Jesus has done for me. I can't earn it. I can't work for it. I can't pay for it. Jesus does everything. And what is it that he does? Verse 4, Jesus Christ gave himself for our sins to rescue us from the present evil age, according to the will of our God and Father. You see, the Christian faith is not about religious things that we do. It's not about religion at all. The Christian faith is about rescue. Jesus came to rescue us from something that we couldn't rescue ourselves from. And what he came to rescue us from, verse 4 tells us, is he came to give ourselves for our sins, to give himself for our sins. That is, for our rebellion against God and the guilt that we rightly have before God because of our rebellion. That's what enslaves us. That's the thing we can't get ourselves out of. That he gave himself at the cross for our sins. That's what we spoke about all Easter weekend, isn't it? And not only that, but we're told we're trapped here, verse 4, in the present evil age. He gave himself for our sins, and he gave himself to rescue us from the present evil age. We live in an evil world. There's no beating around the bush on this. This is an evil world. It's why we don't walk around at night. It's why we don't let our kids walk alone. It's why we sign contracts to protect ourselves. We know this world is full of evil. But Jesus comes to rescue us from ourselves and from this broken world. We cannot do this ourselves. We try, of course. We try to fix ourselves. We try to fix our world, but we can't do it. We need a rescuer. You know, people sometimes say, Jesus is just a crutch. That's all he is. He's a crutch to you. And I want to say, no, Jesus is not a crutch, because a crutch implies that you can hobble around and just lean on him. Right? You just need him to lean on. Jesus is not a crutch. Jesus is the whole rescue team. Right? He's the stretcher. He's the ambulance. He's the defibrillator. We're dead. And he rescues us completely. And we've called our series in Galatians, Jesus plus nothing. Jesus plus nothing. Because we cannot add a single thing to what Jesus has done for us. And our problem is we always want to add something. The attraction of alternative gospels, the attraction of alternative religions, is that they come to us and they put the power in our hands. And they make ourselves the hero of the story. But Jesus has done everything. It's very interesting as Paul addresses these Galatians. Remember, they're not Jewish at all. They've got no Jewish background. It's interesting that as he speaks to them, he says, your problem is not that you're going to add something new. It's that you're going to go back to something old. Let me show you what I mean from a little bit later on in the letter. Chapter 4, verse 8. Paul says, formerly, when you did not know God, you were slaves to those who by nature were not gods. He's describing their pagan religion, isn't he? Going after these things, worshiping these things that were not gods. Verse 9, but now that you know God, or rather are known by God, how is it that you are turning back to those weak and miserable forces? Do you wish to be enslaved by them all over again? It's very strange, isn't it? They've never been enslaved by Jewish practices and customs and Sabbaths and circumcisions. What is he talking about? Or verse 5, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then. Do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. What is he talking about? This word again. What he's saying is simply this. You can be burdened and enslaved by religious practices, like the Jews were coming in and saying that they should practice. Or you can be burdened and enslaved by worshiping some false god. And he's saying it's basically the same thing. You see, what happens when you worship a pagan god is you're offering that god something in the hope that they'll do something for you. Right? That's how it worked. You went to the temple, you did a sacrifice, or you offered something to the gods in the hope that somehow they would reward you for that and accept you because of that. And what Paul is saying is basically that's exactly what's happening as soon as you depart from Jesus and try to add to Jesus all kinds of other rituals and practices and customs. You're trying to do things in order to make God accept you. You're trying to earn his acceptance and trying to earn his favor, just like your old pagan religion. This is nothing new. In fact, this is something very old. No, the Christian gospel is about a God who radically rescues us, in spite of our sin, in spite of ourselves. And the effect of this grace, that's the first word, the effect of this is the second word, peace. That's the result of what God does for us. Jesus has now put us right with the God of the universe, and he has brought us peace. I love the change of language from verse 1 to verse 3. Verse 1 talks about God the Father, but verse 3, because of what Christ has done, talks about God our Father. That's what grace and peace does. It makes God the Father, God our Father. You see, what Jesus does doesn't just make friends out of enemies, it makes children who can call God their own Father. Grace and peace. Can you see what's at stake here? There is nothing else. There is no message. There is no gospel in all of the world that can bring grace and peace like this. The only message we have is about a Savior who came to rescue us by giving up his life. And we just simply need to trust him. And so thirdly, this gospel needs to be handled with great care. It needs to be protected with unique care. It cannot be altered. It cannot be watered down. It cannot be improved upon. It is Jesus plus nothing. You know, normally in Paul's letters, after the opening greeting section, you know, Paul to the Galatians, normally there'd be some kind of thanksgiving. I thank my God for this and this and this and all that I see in you as a church. In this letter, there is no thanksgiving. The only letter in which Paul has nothing to thank God for, really. And the reason is not so much that there's nothing to thank God for, it's that this issue is too urgent. He needs to get right to it. And so that's what he does. Verse 6. He says, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. Now, the scary thing in these verses is the word how quickly. How quickly. What surprises Paul is not that this is happening because this happens, but how quickly it's happening. Verse 6. I mean, they'd only been Christians for a few years, and they're already abandoning the grace of Christ that he has won for them on the cross and are turning to a different gospel. You know, we do need to realize that this can happen very quickly. And as I said earlier, it can happen to good churches, established churches, good Christians, established Christians. Even as we will see later in the letter, even the Apostle Peter was confused. See, it turns out that veering away from Jesus is actually what happens to sinners all the time. You know, my first car was a 1987 gold Ford Escort with a big black spoiler on the back. The spoiler was completely useless because as soon as you went over 80 k's an hour, the thing shuddered and shook. But this old golden Ford Escort was my first car. And the thing about this car was that the wheel alignment was so bad that no matter how many times I tried to fix it, if you took your hands off the steering wheel, you'd end up in the right-hand side of the ditch. That's how the car drove. No amount of fixing could correct that. Now, as I think about my old gold Ford Escort, I think about how we are naturally. We naturally veer off away from Jesus. We naturally veer off into some sort of self-service religion where we put the power in our own hands to try and save ourselves. That's what sin does. And God says to us, we can never do that. See, religion is so popular because it offers us the power to do this. But of course, there is no power. But this can also happen. We can also veer away from Jesus simply by feeling that in some way we have to earn our standing with God again. You know, sometimes I have people in my office who come feeling distraught because they're struggling with a sense of guilt and shame perhaps. Maybe they're battling with assurance. And they'll say something to me like, I really don't feel I'm good enough for God. Have you ever felt like that? I'm not good enough for God? And often what I have to say to them is, no, your problem is not that you don't feel good enough for God. Your problem is that you don't realize how bad you are in your relationship with God. Our problem is not that we're not good enough. Our problem is that we don't realize we're that bad. See, if you think that somehow you can be good enough, that if you just get your life sorted out, if you just fix a few things, if you just feel a little bit closer to God, then God will be closer. You're in the same trap that the Galatians are falling into, because you're putting all the responsibility to be right with God on your own shoulders. And in that case, what you have to realize is, no, you're far worse than you think. And it's only Christ who can rescue you from that. Not I, but Christ. It can also happen, we can also veer off course, when we find ourselves that we want a bigger experience of God, more of a kind of an encounter with God. When Jesus no longer is enough for us, and we want some sort of second blessing experience or some sort of additional encounter or experience of God's power in our lives. Again, I want to say to you, there is nothing outside of Jesus. It is Jesus plus nothing. See, friends, we need to be very careful. We need to show unique care with our grasp of the gospel. It is easy to veer off course. It is easy. It happens very quickly. We've got to exercise great care. Because the problem is, verse 6 tells us, when we desert the gospel, well, notice what it says. He says, you're so quickly deserting, not the gospel, you're deserting the one who called you. You're deserting God himself. So there's the care that we need to pay ourselves, but there is also the care that the leaders and pastors over us need to care to the gospel, or need to give to the gospel. If individuals veer away from the gospel, how much more serious when those who should be helping people understand the gospel are pushing them off the road of grace. And so no wonder Paul doesn't mince his words in verse 8. Have a look. He says, but even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. As we've already said, and so now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. That's strong language, isn't it? Twice he says, you will be under God's curse if you in any way are pushing people off the path of God's grace and peace found in Jesus. See, church leaders have an obligation before God to protect their people from fake gospels. It's our job. And if you teach God's word in any form, whether it's Sunday school or growth group, it's your job. And you're going to be held accountable for whether you do that or not. And Paul says we've got to be careful. If we ever are involved in pushing people away from grace, we are going to be under God's curse. And so if you ever hear a church leader, if you ever hear somebody from this pulpit who says anything other than Jesus alone for our salvation, you need to stand firm against that. You need to push back hard against that, and you need to warn others. Find teachers who will give you the revolutionary gospel of grace and peace in the Savior that came to rescue us by giving up his life. We have nothing else. It's Jesus plus nothing. Because only this gospel has unique authority, unique power, and therefore should be handled with unique care. Let's pray together. Lord, we thank you for this warning this morning in this passage. It's a sober warning. It's a warning that affects all of us. And Lord, we know that you warn us because you love us, because you care for us. So Lord, won't you help us to guard against any false gospels that we may come across that may seem attractive to us, that offer us perhaps more than we find in the Bible. Help us, Lord, to stand firm on Christ alone, to know that it is not Christ, it is not I, but it is Christ alone that we have our hope in and we depend upon. So, Lord, protect us, guard us, and help us, Lord, to be so convinced by the power of this message that we would